The moving boxes were already in my living room before I agreed to a single thing. That was the moment I understood. Not when my son raised his voice. He never did, not once, which somehow made it worse. Not when my daughter-in-law slid a folder across my own kitchen table like she was closing a business deal. It was the boxes, flattened, stacked by the door, waiting for me to fill them with 73 years of my life before I had said yes. I stood in the doorway of the home my husband Joseph built with his brothers the summer after we married, and I watched my son Michael avoid my eyes. "It's just so you have options, Mom," he said. "That's all this is." I looked at the boxes, flat cardboard, still folded, the tape not yet peeled from the roll tucked beside them. Someone had chosen the size carefully, medium, not large, the kind meant for a life being reduced rather than a life being moved whole. I thought of Joseph's reading chair, the one with the worn left armrest where his elbow had rested every evening for 38 years. I thought of the cedar box in my closet that held my mother's beadwork, older than the state this county belongs to. I wondered which boxes those things were meant to fit into and whether anyone had asked. "Options," I repeated, testing the word the way you test ice before you trust your weight to it. "Whose options, Michael? I don't remember being given any to choose from. I remember boxes." He opened his mouth, and for a moment I thought he might actually answer me honestly, might let the truth surface the way a fish rises just before it decides against the hook. Instead, he said, "We can talk about the details later. Right now, I just want you to know we love you and we're thinking about your future." "We're thinking about your future," as though my future were a country I no longer had the standing to govern. I have thought about that sentence many times since, turned it over the way you turn a stone looking for what's crawled underneath it. It is a sentence that sounds like devotion and functions like a door quietly closing. Then I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I did not know my own son's face. I want to tell you how I got to that morning, because it did not happen in one betrayal. It happened in 100 small ones, each so soft I mistook it for love. My name is Helen Greywolf. I am 73 years old. I have lived in this house on the ridge above Miller Creek for 48 years, in a community my people have called home longer than the county has had a name for it. My husband Joseph passed 10 years ago this November, and since then I have lived here alone, though I would not call it lonely. The house holds him, the garden holds him, the cedar trees along the fence line, the ones he planted the year Michael was born, hold him too. I raised 2 children in this house, Michael, my son, who inherited his father's quiet and his father's habit of solving problems by disappearing into them rather than talking them through, and Denise, my daughter, who inherited my mother's tongue, sharp when she is scared, softer than she will admit when no one is looking. I was a school teacher for 31 years, mostly to children on the reservation, some of them the grandchildren of children I had already taught. I know what it is to watch a family across 3 generations. I know what it looks like when something is bending before it breaks. I did not think I would see it in my own house. For a long time after Joseph died, my children checked on me the way grief teaches people to check on each other. Too much, then not enough, then somewhere in between that becomes the new normal. Michael called on Sundays, Denise visited on holidays with her husband Paul, and my granddaughter Lily, who was 11 then and 16 now, and my grandson Tyler, who was born the year after Joseph died and never knew his grandfather except through my stories. I was content. I tended my garden. I sat on the porch council some evenings with the other elders, the way I have since before my hair went the color of birch bark. I kept the fire going, as we say, meaning I kept the old ways alive in small, ordinary acts, teaching Lily to bead when she visited, telling Tyler the story of how the elk gave the people their first winter coats, saying the blessing over meals the way my grandmother said it over hers. It was a good life, a full one. I want to tell you a little more about that life because you cannot understand what was taken from me, what was nearly taken from me, without understanding what it was built from. Joseph and I met at a powwow 2 counties over when I was 19, the summer after I finished my teaching certificate. He was working construction then, quiet in the way that made people mistake him for shy, though he was not shy at all. He simply believed most words weren't worth spending unless they were true. We married the following spring, and his father gave us the northern half of the ridgeland as a wedding gift, the same way his father had given it to him and his father before that. Joseph spent our first summer as husband and wife building the house board by board with his brothers, and I spent it hauling water and mixing mortar and learning for the first time in my life what it meant to build something that was going to outlast me. We raised Michael and Denise in that house. I taught school by day and came home to a kitchen that always smelled like fry bread or venison stew, depending on the season, and Joseph taught the children to fish the creek the way his own father had taught him, patient past the point where most men would have given up on a wriggling, complaining child. We were not wealthy, not by the standards the county assessor's office uses to measure a family, but we were rich in the ways that mattered to us, rich in belonging, in ceremony, in neighbors who would drop everything to help bring in a harvest or sit with a sick child through the night. When Joseph died, the hardest part was not the loneliness, though there was plenty of that in the beginning. The hardest part was realizing that I had become, without asking for the position, the keeper of everything he and I had built together. Memories, traditions, a house full of stories that no one else could tell quite the way I could. I did not resent the weight of it. I welcomed it, in truth. It gave my grief somewhere useful to go. So when Michael began, a year ago, to ask his careful, gentle questions, I did not recognize them at first for what they were, because I had spent my whole life being the one who held things steady for everyone else. It did not occur to me that the steadying might, one day, be aimed at me. Then, about a year ago, Michael began asking questions that sounded like concern and felt later like something else entirely. The first warning sign was so small I nearly missed it. Michael called on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, which was unusual enough on its own. "Mom, when's the last time you saw Dr. Ferris?" "March," I said. "I'm not due again until fall. Why?" "No reason, just thinking about you." A pause, too long for a man who never used to pause. "You're not planning any big projects on the house or land right now, are you?" I told him no, and I meant it, and I did not think about the question again until the next one arrived a few weeks later, wearing a different disguise. Denise visited in June with Paul and the children, and over coffee she mentioned, almost carelessly, that her friend's mother had recently set up something called a power of attorney just to make things easier down the road. "Easier for who?" I asked, and she laughed like I'd made a joke, though I hadn't meant one. "For everybody, Mom. It's just paperwork. It doesn't mean anything's wrong." I let it go, the way you let go of a splinter too small to dig for, but I noticed, the way I used to notice which of my students hadn't done the reading, not because of what they said, but because of how carefully they avoided saying it. By August, the calls had a rhythm to them. "How's your memory been, Mom? Are you sleeping all right? Have you thought about whether this house is too much house for one person?" Each question wrapped in tenderness, each one, I would later understand, laying a brick. There were other signs, too, smaller ones, the kind you only recognize afterward, laid end to end. Denise mentioned, during that same June visit, that Michael had asked her, Casually, she said, over the phone, not in any way that alarmed her at the time, whether she remembered me ever repeating myself, forgetting names, losing track of a conversation mid-sentence. She'd laughed it off. "I told him you're sharper than both of us combined," she said. And I laughed too that day, because it seemed like nothing. A brother worrying, a son doing the ordinary arithmetic of aging parents. But then, in July, Tyler, my grandson, 12 years old and about as subtle as a screen door in a windstorm, asked me at dinner, apropos of nothing, "Grandma, are you going to have to move to a home?" I set down my fork. "Where did you hear that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, already regretting he'd said it. "Dad was talking to Mom about it, in the car. He didn't know I could hear." I did not push the boy further. Children should not be made to carry adult secrets they've stumbled into by accident. But I sat with that sentence for days afterward, turning it over the way you turn over a stone in a creek bed, looking for what's underneath. And then there was the matter of the mail. I have received my property tax statement every October for 48 years, delivered to this address, addressed to Helen and Joseph Greywolf, and then, after Joseph passed, to Helen Greywolf alone. That October, it did not come. I called the assessor's office to ask if there had been an error, and the young man who answered told me politely that the request for a duplicate copy had already been made by a Michael Greywolf, listed as an authorized contact on the account. I had not authorized any such thing. I want to be fair to my son, even now, even after everything. I do not believe he woke up one morning and decided to take something from his mother. I believe it happened to him the way it happened to me, slowly, in pieces disguised as concern, until the pieces added up to something neither of us had chosen on purpose. A man does not usually set out to deceive his mother. More often, he tells himself a story in which deceiving her is actually a kindness, and he tells that story so many times, to so many people, that eventually he believes it himself. But I am getting ahead of the story, and a story told out of order is a story told poorly. My grandmother taught me that too. 2 weeks later, Michael and Rachel drove up from the city just to visit on a Thursday, which they had never once done in 9 years of marriage. We sat in my living room. Rachel had brought a pie she did not bake herself. I could tell by the crust, too even, machine cut, and she set it on the counter like an offering before she'd said a single word of greeting. "Mom," Michael began, and I heard in the shape of that single word everything that was coming. "We've been thinking about the house, about you being out here alone." "I'm not alone," I said. "I have neighbors who've known me 40 years. I have the whole nation around me. I have more company on a Tuesday than you have in a month in that city." "That's not what I mean." He glanced at Rachel. She nodded, the smallest movement, like she was cueing an actor. "There's a place, Cedar View it's called, over in Ashford, assisted living, but nice, independent apartments to start. You'd have your own space, but people checking on you, meals if you wanted them." "I have meals," I said. "I have a garden that gives me more tomatoes than I can eat." "Mom," Rachel's voice, gentle as a nurse delivering a diagnosis, "it's not really about the tomatoes." "Then what is it about?" And here is where the folder came out. Rachel produced it from her bag like she'd rehearsed the motion and slid it across my table, and inside were papers with words I understood perfectly well, despite what my son clearly believed about my mind. Durable power of attorney, voluntary property transfer, life estate reservation, and beneath those a listing sheet, glossy, professional, my own house and land photographed from a drone with a price at the bottom that made my stomach turn to ice. "You already had it appraised?" I said. Michael had the decency, at least, to look ashamed. "We wanted to know what our options were, that's all. Nothing's decided." "Whose options?" I asked. "I don't see my name on this list of who's deciding." "Mom, please don't make this into—" "Into what, Michael? Into what it is?" He stood up. He never used to stand up when we argued. His father taught him better than that. "I'm trying to protect you," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word in a way that, God help me, still moved something in my chest even as I sat there holding proof of what he'd already set in motion behind my back. "You don't understand what's coming." "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me what's coming instead of deciding for me what I can carry." He didn't answer. He looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the pie she hadn't baked, and I understood in that silence that there was more to this story than a nervous son worried about his aging mother. There was a piece of the story neither of them was ready to hand me yet. They left without the papers signed, but they left the boxes. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my porch in Joseph's old chair, wrapped in the quilt my mother made me for my wedding, and I watched the stars the way I have watched them my whole life, and I asked them, the way I ask them when I need to think clearly, what it was I was not yet seeing. By morning I had a plan. Not a plan for revenge. That has never been the way of my people, and it was never going to be my way either, no matter how betrayed I felt. A plan for the truth. There is a difference, and it matters. I called my daughter Denise. "Denise," I said, "I need you to come home, not for a visit. I need you to help me understand what your brother has done." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that told me she already knew more than she'd let on. "Mom, I've been trying to call him for 2 weeks. He won't answer me either." Denise arrived the next afternoon, and together we did what I should have realized weeks earlier we needed to do. Not confront Michael again, but go straight to the source. I called Robert back and asked him to walk me through everything he knew about Rockwood Development. Denise, who works in finance in the city and understands paperwork the way I understand seasons, drove to Braddock and Klein's office herself, and using nothing but her married name and a great deal of persistence, got a junior associate to say more than he should have. What we found was not the story I had built in my head on that long, sleepless night. Michael was not selling my land out from under me for a payday. Michael was drowning. 2 years ago, he'd co-signed a loan for his business partner, a hardware distribution company that had folded during a bad season, and the debt had landed on him alone when the partner declared bankruptcy and vanished to another state. Michael had said nothing to any of us, not to Denise, not to me, not, I would later learn, even fully to Rachel until the collectors started calling the house. He was 6 months from losing his own home in the city, his own children's home, and somewhere in his panic, someone at Braddock and Klein had mentioned that Rockwood Development was paying well above market for ridge parcels, and that his mother's land he stood to inherit eventually anyway, could solve everything, if only she'd agree to transfer it now instead of later. He had not told me any of this. He had decided, in the particular cowardice that comes from loving someone too much to disappoint them, that it would be easier to convince me I could no longer manage on my own than to admit he had failed to manage his own life and needed his mother's help to fix it. That was the twist beneath the twist. Not a villain, a frightened man wearing his mother's supposed frailty like a mask because his own truth felt heavier than the lie. The twist beneath the twist. Not a villain, a frightened man wearing his mother's supposed frailty like a mask because his own truth felt heavier than the lie. I confronted him 3 days later, in his own kitchen this time, on my terms. Denise came with me. Rachel was there too, and when I walked in, I saw on her face the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a secret so long it has become heavier than the truth would have been. "I know about the loan," I said, before Michael could offer me another folder, another gentle lie dressed as concern. "I know about the partner. I know you're 6 months from losing your house, and I know that instead of telling your mother the truth, you decided to tell her she was losing her mind." The color left his face. "Mom, Sit down, Michael." He sat. "I have not raised my voice at my son since he was 19 years old and wrapped his father's truck around a fence post, and I did not raise it now, but I did not need to. Some truths land harder delivered quietly. I am your son. You have been afraid of disappointing me since you were a boy, and I don't fully know why, because I have never once been disappointed in you the way you seem to fear. But you have made a terrible mistake, and I need you to hear me say it plainly. You tried to take my home by convincing me and everyone around me that I could no longer be trusted with my own mind. Do you understand what that is? That is not protecting your mother. That is erasing her." He put his face in his hands. Rachel reached for his shoulder, and for the first time I saw genuine grief in her, not performance. "I didn't know how else to fix it. I couldn't tell you I failed. I couldn't tell you I let a stranger destroy everything you and Dad worked for. It was easier to let you think it was your fault somehow, your age, your memory, than to admit it was mine." "Nothing about this is easier," I said. "Look at what it has cost. Look at what you nearly did to both of us." Denise, who had been quiet until then, arms crossed, jaw set the way it used to set when she was a girl determined not to cry in front of her brother, finally spoke. "You asked me to help you convince Mom she needed a power of attorney. You told me it was for her own good. Do you understand what you asked me to do to our own mother?" "I know, Denise. I know. You made me complicit in something I didn't even understand. That's not nothing, Michael." "I know," he said again, and this time it came out smaller, the voice of the boy who used to hide broken dishes under the porch rather than admit he'd knocked them off the shelf. I let the silence sit for a moment before I spoke again, because some things need room around them to be heard properly. "Michael, look at me." He lifted his face, and his eyes were red, and for one unguarded moment I saw not the man who brought me a folder full of appraisals, but the boy who used to sleep against my shoulder during long car rides, certain nothing in the world could touch him as long as I was there. "I have loved you before you had a name," I said. "That has never once been in question, and it is not in question now. But love does not mean I will pretend what you did wasn't a wound. It was. You do not have to be punished for it to be healed, but you do have to be honest with me, with Rachel, with yourself, about how deep it went, or it will not heal at all. It will just scar over something rotten underneath." Rachel spoke then, quietly, for the first time all evening. "I told him he should tell you the truth back in March, when the second collection notice came." She looked at her hands. "I didn't push hard enough. I'm sorry too, Helen. I let myself believe it might just quietly work out, the way these things sometimes do if you don't look at them too closely." "They don't," I said, not unkindly. "They almost never do." Michael nodded, slowly, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what his own shoulders felt like without it. "What do I do now?" "You start with the truth, all of it, to the bank, to the lawyers, to your children, so they don't learn it the way Lily did, in pieces, through a garage door, frightened and confused. And you let your family carry it instead of deciding alone that we're all too fragile or too disappointable to be trusted with it." It was not forgiveness yet, not fully. Forgiveness, in my experience, is rarely a single sentence spoken in a kitchen.
It is a decision you keep making morning after morning until one day you notice you have stopped needing to make it because it has simply become true. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, I have learned, matter more than people give them credit for.
We did not resolve everything that night. Some wounds need air before they can close, and I have learned across 73 years that rushing a wound only teaches it to scar wrong. But something did shift. Michael, for the first time in over a year, told me the truth in full. The collectors, the sleepless nights, the shame he'd been unable to hand to anyone, least of all his mother, whom he'd always believed needed to see him as strong rather than struggling. Denise, furious at first, softened when she understood what fear does to a person who has never learned how to ask for help. And I understood something too, something about myself I had not expected to learn at 73, that in trying so hard for so long to hold my family together, to be the steady center everyone could return to, I had taught my son that struggle was something to hide from me rather than bring to me. I had spent years trying to fix my family from a distance, smoothing arguments before they surfaced, absorbing worry so no one else had to carry it. I thought that was love. I am no longer sure it was not in part control, a fear of my own that if I ever stopped holding everything steady, it would all come apart. The day I stopped trying to fix my family was not the day I stopped loving them. It was the day I understood that love is not the same as management. It was the day I told Michael plainly, I cannot solve this for you. I can only stand beside you while you solve it yourself, and meant it, and let the silence that followed be his to fill, not mine. He found a way through in the end, though it was not the way he'd planned. He sold his own house in the city, the one he'd been so desperate to protect that he nearly sacrificed mine instead. He and Rachel and the children moved for a time into the old guest cabin on my land, the one Joseph built for visiting elders, sturdier than it looks, while he restructured the debt and rebuilt, slower this time, more honestly. Rockwood Development found another parcel further down the ridge, and the last I heard, the golf course never came to be. The county lost interest when a different developer's project fell through for reasons that had nothing to do with any of us. Those months with Michael's family living in the cabin were, unexpectedly, some of the richest of my recent life. Tyler took to following Robert around the property on weekends, learning to check fence lines and read weather in the shape of clouds the way his grandfather once taught his own father. Lily spent whole afternoons at my kitchen table, and it was there, stringing beads and patterns her great-great-grandmother would have recognized, that she finally asked me the question she'd clearly been carrying since that frightened phone call in September. "Were you scared, Grandma, when you found out what Dad was doing?" I thought about lying to her, the small kind of lie adults tell children to spare them a harder truth. I decided against it because I have never believed protecting a child means hiding the shape of the world from them entirely. Yes, I told her, I was scared and I was angry, and underneath both of those for a while, I was something harder to admit. I was ashamed, not of your father, of myself a little. I wondered if I had somehow taught him that keeping quiet was safer than telling me the truth. I wondered if, all those years I spent trying to hold everyone together, I had accidentally taught my own son that he wasn't allowed to come to me broken. "Is that true?" Lily asked. "Did you teach him that?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe a little. Maybe he would have hidden it from anyone, no matter how I raised him. What I do know is that once I understood that possibility, I could not go back to holding everyone together the same way I always had. I had to learn to let people come to me broken instead of only ever showing up steady." Lily nodded slowly, the way she does when she's filing something away to think about later on her own, the way I used to file away my grandmother's lessons long before I understood what they meant. The land stayed mine, but that was never really the ending. The ending was smaller than that, and larger. The months that followed were not easy, and I will not pretend they were.
There were dinners where Michael and I sat across from each other with careful, polite conversation, standing in for the harder conversation still working its way to the surface. There were nights I lay awake still, turning over the exact moment I should have seen it sooner, a habit I have had to teach myself to release, because dwelling in what I should have caught earlier is its own kind of trap, one that keeps you standing in the past instead of walking forward through the present. Rachel and I grew closer than we had ever been, oddly enough, in the aftermath. She came to me one afternoon that winter, alone, and told me the parts of the story Michael still could not quite say aloud. How frightened he was, how many nights he'd sat in his truck outside their own house, unable to go inside and tell his wife what he'd let happen to his business. How the shame had calcified into something that no longer resembled shame at all, but looked from the outside like calm competence, like a man handling a difficult situation with his mother's best interests at heart. She told me he wasn't lying to hurt you. He was lying because he'd convinced himself hurting you a little was kinder than admitting he'd failed you completely. I told her what I have come to believe is true of most betrayals inside a family. They are rarely committed by people who have stopped loving you. More often, they are committed by people who love you so much they cannot bear for you to see them clearly. Denise, for her part, took longer to soften than I expected. She had grown up watching her brother get the benefit of every doubt, a family pattern older than either of them, one I'll own my part in. And this time, she said, she was not interested in extending it automatically. I love him, she told me, but I'm not going to pretend what he did was a small thing just because it worked out. I did not ask her to pretend. I only asked her to leave room for the possibility that a person could do a small-souled thing and still, underneath it, remain someone worth loving. She did, eventually, in her own time, on her own terms, which is, I have come to believe, the only way forgiveness that's worth anything ever actually arrives.
Lily, my granddaughter, asked me not long ago why I hadn't been angrier, why after everything I had let her father move onto my land instead of making him earn his way back some other way. I told her what my grandmother told me, the winter I was about her age and furious at my own father for a mistake I no longer even remember the shape of. Anger is a fire you can warm your hands at for a little while, I said. But if you build your house on top of it, eventually it burns the house down too. Your father did not betray me because he stopped loving me. He betrayed me because he was drowning, and drowning people reach for whatever is nearest, even the people who love them most. My work was not to punish him for that. My work was to make sure that the next time he is drowning, he knows he can simply say so. Lily sat with that for a long while, turning a bead over in her fingers, the same kind I taught her to string the summer she was 11, back before any of this began. "Is that native wisdom, Grandma?" she asked, half teasing. "It is grandmother wisdom," I told her, "which is older than any one nation and belongs, I think, to anyone patient enough to have lived long enough to learn it." I told the other elders what had happened eventually, sitting in a circle of folding chairs behind the community hall the way we do most Thursday evenings when the weather allows it. I was not sure going in how much I wanted to share. Some of what happened felt too private, too much like family laundry to hang out in front of people who had known me since before Michael was born. But Ruth Blackhawk, who is 81 and has buried 2 husbands and outlived a great deal more heartbreak than I have, patted my hand when I finished and said only, "Every family has a season where the young ones forget the elders are still the roots, not just the branches that need trimming. It happened to me with my own daughter 30 years ago now. It will happen to someone else's mother next year and the year after that. The question was never whether it would happen to you, Helen. The question was only whether you would let it convince you that you had already become what they were afraid you'd become." "And did it?" I asked her. "Convince you when it happened to you?" She laughed, the low, easy laugh of a woman who has made her peace with far worse than a frightened son. "For about a week," she said. "Then I remembered who I was before anyone started asking me whether I remembered anything at all." I have thought about that conversation often since.
There is a particular danger, I have come to understand, in being handled gently by people who love you, a danger different from cruelty, harder to name, harder to defend yourself against because it arrives disguised as care. When someone treats you as fragile long enough, with enough tenderness in their voice, a part of you starts to wonder if they know something about you that you don't. I felt that wondering creep in during those weeks with the boxes stacked by my door. I want to be honest about that because I think it is the most dangerous part of the whole story, more dangerous even than the appraisal folder or the survey flags along my fence line. It is one thing to be lied to, it is another thing to nearly believe the lie about yourself. I did not believe it in the end, but I understand now why so many people do. I still tend my garden. I still sit on the porch some evenings with the other elders, watching the light change over the ridge Rockwood development never got to touch. Michael visits now without an agenda folded into his voice. Denise calls just to talk, not to test the waters first. And I have stopped trying to hold my family together by force of will alone, the way I once held a classroom of 30 children together through sheer patience and repetition. I have learned instead to let them come to me with their fears, their failures, their unfinished stories, and to trust that love strong enough to survive the truth was never going to be destroyed by it. Sometimes in the evenings I still catch myself reaching for the old habit, smoothing a tension before it fully surfaces, offering to carry a worry someone hasn't yet asked me to carry. And then I stop myself, gently, the way you'd stop a child from touching a stove they've already been burned by once before. Not everyone needs fixing. Sometimes they only need to know the door is open, and whoever walks through it, however broken, will still be welcome at my table. That, I think, is the only wisdom worth passing down, that peace does not come from fixing everyone around you. It comes from finally trusting them enough to stop. If this story found you at the right moment, if some part of you recognized a family you are still trying to hold together with both hands, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what is the one truth in your family that has been waiting patiently for someone brave enough to finally say it out loud?